Autumn is my favorite season, with crisp air, golden leaves, and the thrill of Halloween decorations. This year, I wanted to find something unique to adorn my porch, so I scoured online marketplaces for vintage fall decor. What I found seemed perfect at first, until I brought it home. I'm a sucker for fall. Every October, I go all out decorating. Pumpkins on the porch, dried corn bundles on the stairs, that sort of thing. This year, I was on the hunt for something a little different. I wanted that vintage, slightly creepy vibe you see in old Halloween photos. After scrolling through online listings, I stumbled on one that seemed perfect. Vintage fall decor, antique scarecrow, and more. The seller was an older woman named Mrs. Enders. Her profile picture looked like it was taken decades ago, and the items listed seemed worn and a little unsettling, which was exactly the vibe I wanted. I messaged her, and we set up a time for me to pick them up at her place. She didn't live far, just a few towns over, so I figured it would be a quick in and out kind of thing. When I pulled up to her house, I had to double-check the address. The place was practically falling apart. Paint peeling, overgrown bushes, the whole haunted house aesthetic. I felt a little tug in my gut that I should turn back, but she opened the door before I had the chance. Mrs. Enders was frail, with eyes that seemed almost too alert, darting from side to side as she invited me in. Her living room was filled with what looked like relics from another time. Antique dolls, strange wood carvings, faded photos of people who seemed long gone. My eyes landed on the scarecrow in the corner. It was life-sized, with a weathered, burlapped face that looked oddly realistic, its straw-stuffed body sagging as if it had been through years of rough weather. The eyes, though, they were disturbingly lifelike, glossy, almost wet, and seemed to follow me around the room. "You like him, don't you?" she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Yeah, it's unique," I replied, not wanting to offend her. "Oh, it's more than unique. He's special. He'll watch over you, make sure your home is safe," she murmured, almost to herself. I was here for some vintage decorations, not an unnerving scarecrow, but she kept pushing, insisting I take him along with some other smaller items. She practically gave them away, only charging a few bucks, so I caved. The scarecrow was surprisingly light, and I hauled it into the back seat, feeling a strange itch between my shoulder blades, like I was being watched. When I glanced back at the house, Mrs. Enders was standing by the door, smiling faintly and waving goodbye. Back home, I set him up on my front porch and got busy with the rest of my decorations. At first, it was fine, but over the next few days, strange things started happening. I'd come home from work and he'd be different. Like one day, his head was tilted just a bit to the left. I shrugged it off as a gust of wind or a trick of my mind. But every day he seemed closer to the front door, as if he was inching forward. The breaking point came one night. I woke up around 3 in the morning, feeling uneasy. I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't alone. When I sat up, I almost screamed. The scarecrow was standing in the doorway to my bedroom. I'd left him outside. I was sure of it. I had to be dreaming, but the way those lifelike eyes glinted in the moonlight was too real. My heart pounded as I got up and carried him back outside, my hands shaking. I propped him against the porch railing and made sure he was secure. But when I turned to go back inside, I could have sworn I heard a faint whisper, almost like a sigh, coming from behind me. The next morning, I called the police, feeling ridiculous as I explained what happened. They came out, did a sweep, and assured me it was probably a prank. But they looked confused when they couldn't find the scarecrow. We searched the yard, the neighborhood, but it was like he'd vanished. Mrs. Enders' online ad was gone, and no one in town had ever heard of her. A few nights later, I found something that made my blood run cold. Under my pillow was a single piece of straw, brittle and stained with something dark. That night, I lay in bed, listening, every creak and rustle amplifying the dread building inside me. I tried to sleep, tried to shake the feeling, but as I drifted off, I felt it. The faintest brush of straw against my cheek, and the chill of a breath that wasn't mine. It was the fall tradition in our town to visit Cooper's pumpkin patch as Halloween neared. Every October, the place transformed into a sea of orange, with pumpkins of every size and shape lined up for miles, and families streaming in to find their perfect one. But this year, something was different. I'd been going to Cooper's since I was a kid, but that day, the patch was emptier than usual. The air felt thick, like an unspoken warning hung in the breeze. I was determined to keep up tradition, though, and walked between the rows until I saw it. A deep, crimson-colored pumpkin, glistening like it was fresh off the vine. It wasn't huge or oddly shaped, but something about it drew me in. When I went to pick it up, an older man appeared beside me. He was wearing a faded Cooper's Pumpkin Patch shirt, and he looked rough around the edges, with deep-set eyes that glinted in the shadow of his hat. "Looking at Blood Moon, huh?" he asked. I raised an eyebrow. "Blood Moon?" "That's what we call him," he said, nodding toward the pumpkin. "He shows up every couple years, never in the same spot. Folks say he brings bad luck." I chuckled, assuming he was trying to play up the Halloween atmosphere. "Well, I think I'll take my chances." The man gave me a long, unsettling look. "Suit yourself," he said, but as I picked up the pumpkin, I could have sworn he muttered, "Hope you know what you're getting into." Brushing off the encounter, I paid for the pumpkin and took it home. But even then, a strange feeling nagged at me. As I set Blood Moon on my porch, I noticed it didn't have the typical pumpkin smell. Instead, there was a faint metallic tang, almost like copper. That night, things started to go wrong. I'd been asleep for maybe an hour when I heard a soft thud outside my window. Groggy, I got up and looked out, but there was nothing there. Thinking it was just an animal, I crawled back into bed. But as soon as I closed my eyes, I heard it again. Another quiet, echoing thud, closer this time. I was about to ignore it when a chill ran down my spine. The thudding, it was rhythmic, like footsteps. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was just outside. I turned on the porch light and looked out, but everything seemed fine. Blood Moon sat on the porch, staring blankly with its smooth, dark red skin. The next morning, I found deep scratch marks on the wood of my front door. I checked the security footage, and what I saw made my stomach drop. Around 2 in the morning, the pumpkin had rolled off the porch, just out of frame. Minutes later, it was back, as if something had picked it up and placed it there again. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe someone was messing with me. I told myself it was nothing and tried to go about my day. But the following night, it got worse. I woke up to an overpowering coppery smell, as though someone had spilled buckets of blood. As I got up, I realized my hands were sticky, covered in what looked like a thin, red film. Panicked, I flicked on the lights, only to find that my bed was littered with what looked like shredded pieces of pumpkin flesh. I stumbled outside, half dazed with fear, and was greeted by the sight of Blood Moon. It was sitting in the exact same place on the porch, but now cracks ran along its surface, almost like veins, leaking a dark, red substance. I didn't sleep that night. By morning, the cracks were gone, and the pumpkin looked normal again, as if it hadn't dripped a single drop. But I was done. I drove it back to Cooper's, hoping to dump it and forget the whole thing. As I pulled up, that same old man was waiting by the entrance. He didn't seem surprised to see me with Blood Moon, just gave a slow nod. "I tried to warn you," he said as I shoved the pumpkin toward him. "Blood Moon always finds its way back to the patch. It belongs here." "Then keep it," I said, my voice shaking. "Whatever it is, keep it." He nodded, and as I walked away, He picked up the pumpkin with both hands, almost reverently. I glanced back once, just in time to see him set it down in an empty row where no other pumpkins grew. I left without looking back, promising myself I'd never return to Cooper's again. The worst part? That smell of copper still clings to me, even after washing everything I own. And every night, just as I'm about to drift off, I hear it, that same faint thudding outside my window. Every October, a local farm hosted a massive corn maze that people from all over came to visit. This year, they'd upped the ante, advertising it as the Maze of Fears, with spooky decorations and actors hiding along the paths to jump out and scare you. It was supposed to be all in good fun, a way to get into the Halloween spirit. But I hadn't planned on going, until my friends insisted I tag along. We arrived late, and the sky was already a deep purple, stars starting to pop out. The farm was buzzing with laughter, screams, and the sound of crunching leaves underfoot. A chill ran through the air, carrying the scent of fresh soil and corn. As we reached the maze entrance, a towering scarecrow loomed over us, its eyes hollow and unblinking. "Welcome to the Maze of Fears," said a teenager in a cheap skeleton costume. "Turn back if you scare easy." He laughed, and the sound echoed in the night. My friends joked about it being cheesy, but I couldn't shake a strange feeling in my stomach. As we entered, we quickly realized the maze was bigger than it seemed from the outside. The paths twisted, and each turn looked identical, making it nearly impossible to remember which way we'd come. Around the first few turns, actors dressed as ghouls and skeletons jumped out to spook us, and we laughed it off. But after a while, the actors seemed to thin out, and we found ourselves deeper into the maze than we had realized. The cornstalks rose high on either side, rustling in the faint wind, casting eerie shadows. The only sounds were our footsteps and the occasional shuffling in the corn, which could have been anything: a breeze, an animal, or someone. We continued on, but the path wasn't leading us anywhere. There were no more exit signs, no more actors, and we hadn't seen another group of people in a while. My friends were joking around less and glancing over their shoulders more. Finally, one of them, Casey, suggested we split up to cover more ground. None of us really liked the idea, but after another 20 minutes without finding a way out, we decided it was worth a shot. We each took a different path, agreeing to shout if we found the exit. As I walked alone, my flashlight began to flicker. I tapped it, trying to keep it steady, but it died completely, leaving me in near darkness. The corn swayed in the wind, and every few steps I thought I saw shadows darting between the rows, just beyond my line of sight. I kept my hand along the rough corn stalks, trying to keep calm. Then I heard it, a faint whisper, like someone calling my name from somewhere in the maze. Eli. It was so soft I couldn't tell if it was real or if my mind was playing tricks on me. I called out for my friends, but only silence answered. I kept moving, the darkness pressing in on me. After a while, I thought I heard footsteps trailing behind me, soft and shuffling. I spun around, but there was no one there. I called out again, a little louder this time. Still nothing. At that moment, I realized the maze was too quiet. No laughter from other groups, no voices. Just an unnatural silence that filled every inch of the maze. After what felt like hours, I rounded a corner and saw someone up ahead, a person, standing completely still, facing away from me. Relieved, I hurried over, assuming it was one of my friends. But as I got closer, I realized something was off. The figure didn't move or respond to my calls. When I finally got close enough, I stopped dead. The person was wearing one of the farm's skeleton costumes, but this one looked old, the fabric frayed and stained. The mask was cracked, and the eyes behind it, they weren't human. They were black, hollow pits that seemed to pull me in. I stumbled back, the flashlight slipping from my grasp. The figure took a slow step forward, then another, and I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then, in one quick motion, it tilted its head to the side, the mask's jaw dropping open as if to scream, but no sound came out. I bolted, running blindly through the maze, tripping over roots and tearing through stalks, desperate to escape. Finally, I saw the faint glow of lights ahead and burst out of the maze, gasping for air. I turned, expecting to see my friends, but none of them had made it out yet. I waited for hours, calling their names, but they never came out. The maze eventually closed, and the farm workers searched for them, but all they found were torn pieces of their clothes scattered among the corn stalks. The police conducted a thorough investigation, but no one could explain how they'd simply vanished. They asked me over and over to describe what I saw, but I could barely make sense of it myself. Every October, the Maze of Fears opens again, and every year, a few people go missing, never to be seen again. They say the maze is cursed, that it takes a few unlucky souls every Halloween season. And I wonder if somewhere in those endless rows of corn, my friends are still wandering, lost, and calling for help, waiting for the next unlucky visitor.